All right, so we're looking at the rise of totalitarianism leaders, not Hitler. We're going to leave that separate. We're just going to be looking at Stalin and Mussolini. Surprisingly, how similarly they are, even though they're supposed to be on the opposite ends of the political spectrum, right? So a totalitarian state really just aims to control the political, economic, social, intellectual, cultural lives of its citizens. It's not just politics. All right, they want obedience, and basically when there's obedience, the power is given to the central state, the central government. You can think federal government if you'd like. And the question is why did this even happen in between the European wars? And basically it comes down to the government wasn't able to meet the needs of the people. Okay, to some there was some chaos, but for a lot of it, it was really just the rebuilding the country, and also just the mass unemployment and hyperinflation and whatnot. So these extreme ideologies gave people hope, whether it was fascism or communism. All right. So there are some commonalities between the two regimes, just mass propaganda, and now we have modern communications. So it's not just books and newspaper, but rather radio as well. And so they also used education. They got into the schools and were able to dictate what was the curriculum. And really, it wasn't even just the curriculum, like looking at history a certain way, but rather it was promoting fascism as an idea, or communism as an ideal. Okay, they both had secret police. They had a single leader or single party, and basically you'd kill and remove others. So government had power over individual freedoms. We like to think in Western democracies, it's the individual over government. Of course, you have government in control of some things, and for many variety of reasons, but the individual is the focus. But in this case, the government, or rather the nation, they would say the people. All right, when they say the people, it's like, well, what are you talking about exactly there? Whose people? Or all right, so the first one we'll look at is Stalin. He was looked at as either a tyrant who sent people to the Gulag to die, or you could look at him as a World War II hero, really, defeating the Germans. So just a little bit of background. So we called it the USSR all the way from Lenin all the way until it fell in about 1990. So under Lenin control, Russia becomes the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or usually it's just called the Soviet Union. But he died 2 years later, and there was a struggle between Trotsky and Trotsky and Stalin on what direction they should go. Trotsky was probably a little more moderate. They actually had you could actually own a individual bakery or something like that. But Stalin wins out, and he exiles Trotsky, and later he's likely murdered by Stalin's assassins. It's hard to know for sure still. So that's kind of our background information. So one of the big things he did was institute this 5-year plan. Basically, it was designed to quickly industrialize in every sense. All right, so produce heavy equipment, also arms, basically weapons and things like this. And it was actually like 2 5-year plans, and it was actually successful in a way. I mean, it doubled and quadrupled production. But the downside of it was there was little care for the labor force. Wages, standard of living, movement of people declined. And, it did employ everyone, okay? It's just really harsh conditions, and it wasn't good for individuals, but it was good for the nation, the economy, you could argue. You can just look at this chart here, like oil production, or steel. Steel went from 4, the target was 10, but they got 6. But by the end, 10 years later, it went from 4 to 17.7. So they did have great success industrializing, and this was looked at with envy from some of the countries that were capitalistic, capitalist. One other thing he did was collective farms. So his collectivization was all the privately owned, individual family-owned farms were now not allowed, basically, and you could be removed from your farm. So the government owned all the land, but the peasants worked the land. A lot of it was very difficult hand labor. There was strong resistance to this. Before, you would have your crops, you make your own crops, keep your crops, but now you had to send, all of it was owned by the state. So the production was owned by the state, the land was owned by the state, how much food you get goes to the state, okay? So a lot of peasants resisted. In areas that they resisted, there was not as much food allotted, and many millions died of starvation later on. So in 1934, by then 26 million farms had been collectivized. I mean, that's a ton, okay? That's pretty much every family farm. And then 8 to 10 million actually die from famine in the 30s. So again, crops could have been managed better maybe. Food distribution could have been better. There might have been people that would die from famine, but because of Stalin's control, it was it was used as a weapon basically against his opposition. So nobody really should have died of starvation, but millions did. So they can blame the famine, but it was more of a political thing. Another big act was the Great Purge. So remember, Stalin he's paranoid of people that were loyal maybe to Lenin, or just paranoid of anyone taking his power, or trying to assassinate him, or even just be his opposition. So Stalin, he limited all political opposition. It was outlawed, or you were killed. Purged army officers, diplomats, union officials, party members, intellectuals, and numerous ordinary citizens. So this really hurt him later during World War II. Like, he killed off almost all of his generals. If you look at this little graph, corps commanders, army commanders, very few actually survived the Great Purge. So when he went to war, one big reason his military was ineffective is they didn't have experienced leaders with the Soviet army. And so good thing he didn't kill all of them, otherwise maybe Germany would have won. And so 8 to 10 million Russians were arrested, millions were sent to the Gulag in Siberia, and they never returned. They had mass graves are found there. And you could just be executed as the enemy of the state. And that could just be hearsay, accusations. Neighbor says, hey, he's not a communist, then that was enough to kill you in certain situations. He did sign, one other big thing is he did sign the Non-Aggression Pact, because Stalin feared Hitler's power and what he was doing. He could see the growth and influence of Hitler, and he could see his expanse, his political power, and he worried what this could mean for Russia. So he signed the Non-Aggression Pact, and he actually believed it was going to hold up. But 2 years later, Hitler did invade, and actually Stalin hid in his room. But some wonder if he had a mental breakdown. But he actually locked himself in his room for 3 days once this happened. So Stalin and Russia were surprised. They were unprepared. They didn't have the defenses. They didn't have their army ready at all. Russia had a huge army, but they were not organized. Again, kind of goes back to killing off all your army generals. And so people wondered how long it would last. Well, it was just too good of an opportunity for Hitler. He wanted the land, and it went with his narrative of being anti-communist, right? So that's pretty much it for Stalin. Now, Mussolini, he had a rise to power as well. He was actually much before Hitler. Hitler actually very much admired Mussolini. He was kind of the original fascist that got things rolling in Europe. And so just a little background. So early 1920s, he became the fascist ruler. And again, this fascism, the idea is centralized authoritarian government system, glorify the state over the individual, and it was destructive to basic human rights. It includes censorship, extreme nationalism. Any opposition was suppressed. So the only difference between this and communism in this case would be the extreme nationalism part. That wasn't really a thing. It wasn't based so much on race and hate of the other. Don't need to take notes on this, but I just want to bring up that Mussolini, he was this peasant. He was beaten by his father as well. Kind of a horrible upbringing. He was a journalist and politician. He was a great public speaker, though. He had these big crowds. He would have these rallies, and he was very convincing, very impassionate. And he spoke at a low level, like an intellectual level, just so everyone could understand him really well. That's good for politicians. So he actually started as a socialist, but then turned into a fascist leader. He had success originally in his party, but then didn't, and then wanted to do anything except socialism. So he eventually becomes a prime minister, though, for about 20 years, and then the Italian people end up killing him towards the end of the war, and hung his body on display. All right. So how did that actually start, though? So Italy encountered, again, severe economic issues, high unemployment, high inflation. There were industrial and agricultural strikes. And so that affected the business owners as well. They didn't like that part of it either. There's fear of communism and socialism taking over the country. So Mussolini used his forces, the black shirts, all right, and they attacked socialist offices and newspapers and broke up strikes and whatnot. And this is before he's prime minister. So this is his own like just force of people that were fascist. Also, fascism in Italy, there was a desire for land. Industrialists and large landowners supported Mussolini. They didn't like the idea of what if their companies were nationalized? They're going to lose all their wealth if they fall to socialism or communism. So they wanted more land as well, and by supporting him, they won't be, supporting a fascist in mind was better than communists. So during another kind of angst about land is the Paris Peace Conference did not award Italy more land. They thought they were going to get more, and they got very little, even though they sided with the Allies. So Mussolini demanded more land for Italy, and how could you do that? How could you have the glory days of the Roman Empire? Well, they invaded and annexed Ethiopia a little later. So Mussolini does take power, though, because of these issues, and Mussolini marches on Rome, or this it's called the March of Rome. He claimed basically Italy was in chaos, and only he could fix the problem. Nobody else, just him with his strongman attitude. And King Emmanuel concedes, sees this force, and kind of fears what could happen if he doesn't, and he makes Mussolini the prime minister. He feared a coup, he would just be overthrown completely. And the king actually does stay in power, but it's like just as a head of state, like it's just ceremonial at that point. He doesn't have real power. Congress or Parliament, they gave him emergency powers, so he was able to create new laws and suspend publications like newspapers and journals, and then suspend civil liberties like free speech, and increase police powers. And then he was actually elected by the people. Now there might have been some vote rigging and things like that, but he enjoyed a large following. All right, so what power was he able to gain as a prime minister? Well, kind of the political power is he was known as the leader, or El Duce. He controlled mass media to spread propaganda, fascist propaganda, and he outlawed all other political parties. There was a slogan that Mussolini is always right. So no question, he is right. The others are always wrong. So youth groups were also used to promote these ideals. Young people just don't question new policies as much. They don't know it better. And then he also had control over the government economy. So he did eliminate labor unions and the ability to strike. In a positive, public works, he employed citizens, worked on constructing roads and expanding arable land. So he did put people to work. So that was good for business, and it was also good for the nation, sometimes good for the people. And then there was a saying that Mussolini made the trains run on time, but it's actually not true. He didn't make it run on time. It's kind of the meme. Sided with Hitler, but hey, the trains ran on time. So the idea is a lot of people justified it, be like, well, look, he's making progress though, even if all these bad things are happening. But in the end, even the people of Italy realized it wasn't worth it. Mussolini and the church had a relationship. So the Roman Catholic Church, remember that's Rome, or the Vatican, the center of the church is inside Rome. Mussolini was an absolute atheist, but he couldn't afford to anger the church, not upset those people. He needed the support of the church, or at least the support of the people who were in the church. Okay, so he recognized the Catholic Church as part of the Italian heritage. All right, people of Italy were religious for the most part, and they saw that as Mussolini fighting communism was fighting the evil. Right, so he used the church to gain support. He actually got, I think it was a second marriage. He actually got married in the church, while his first marriage he didn't. He spoke out against birth control, even though, again, he was an atheist, so did it really make sense? But anyways, it led to the Lateran Accords. So in 1929, he established the Vatican as a sovereign state, or it wasn't just him. It was also the king, and the church had to negotiate this. But established Vatican as a sovereign state and acknowledged Catholicism as the official religion in Italy. So again, it's not that he was religious, but he needed the support of people that were religious to keep his momentum going. So by 1930s, we see these authoritarian states come up. These are fascists. The other ones are democratic. And you still have authoritarian states as well. Like in Spain, they had a fascist as well that was in charge, but we're not getting into that so much. And that's where we are. And the last thing would be to watch this video. I think it's a great launch pad into the war. Okay, so we can see Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin. See how they got the war going. All right, that's it.